Hi, I'm Rabbi Dan Ain, and I'm joined here today by Jonathan Papernick, the author of the new book, The Book of Stone, which is just out from Fig Tree Books. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Good to be here.
There are many people and news outlets today questioning how it is possible that young people from seemingly proper backgrounds can become exposed and sometimes get sucked into extremist groups. In your novel, your protagonist Matthew Stone is such one of these young people who actually gets sucked into an extremist group, Jewish violent extremist group in Brooklyn. Tell me, what led you to want to address that question?
Well, I was living in Jerusalem in the mid-1990s during the Oslo Peace Accords, or during the beginning of the collapse of the Oslo Peace Accords, and there was a wave of suicide bombings that had gone off there, and they'd blown up actually bus number 18, which was a bus that I'd taken regularly. They blew that one up twice. And then when I moved back to New York afterwards, I'd written my first book, was set in Jerusalem, and I was dealing with kind of a lot of extremists and issues of faith. And I wanted to kind of understand on a deeper level what it was that makes somebody tick, why somebody would want to go and blow somebody up. I mean, because it's inconceivable to me as a suburban, Jewish kid from Toronto that somebody would do that. So when I wrote the Book of Stone, it would have been disingenuous for me to write this from a Palestinian point of view because I didn't really have that sort of insight. And, I was aware of some of the more radical elements in Israel. Obviously, Yigal Amir assassinated Yitzhak Rabin the day before I arrived in Israel. And there was other sorts of characters like that. So I wanted to understand what it would take to make somebody do such a thing. So my character was kind of lost in a drift. He was cut off from his traditions. It didn't really know any of the Jewish traditions. And my novel is set during the high holidays, which I think is a very powerful, awesome time. So I wanted to use this character and have the kind of the lure of faith, a place to belong, being part of a continuum, and have him kind of seek comfort in that and find comfort and find a level of community. But ultimately, that was twisted in such a way that he could be used as a pawn. And I think it worked in a sense that I felt that I created a multidimensional character. I was able to walk in his shoes and understand his motivations.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because when the book opens, you see Matthew in a rather dark place, and throughout the book there's questions about his mental stability. And as an author, I'm wondering how do you inhabit a character like that?
Well, writing is almost like a form of prayer or meditation in your own right. So you kind of close your eyes and you look inside yourself, and there's this kind of massive kind of ocean of the subconscious there that you kind of look into. I mean, all the answers are there. So I knew that I wanted to begin the book with that specific image of Matthew on the roof wearing his father's judge's robes, considering suicide, which is not the ideal way to begin a novel, because where do you go after that? But I thought to show his descent, and he's already starting in a pretty low place, and you think he can't go any lower, but there's kind of chances of hope where he can reach out and he thinks he can kind of pull himself up. We all have dark aspects of ourselves. I don't think any of us are monolithic as human beings. Most of us in our darker moments have had certain thoughts. So you kind of expand upon that and kind of imagine what it would be like. I mean, there are no, not that I know of at least, novelist bank robbers or serial killers, because we can do that in our work. We can kind of get that out of our system. So you're able to kind of become somebody else, understand a different part of yourself. This is somebody who I might have been if I'd gone through these different doors. Yeah, that's how it is. I think the main thing that I aim to do when I write is to make multidimensional, real human beings. And I believe that Matthew Stone exists as a real person.
Yeah, you really got a sense of, as you mentioned before, the appeal, the draw that a person of Matthew's situation might find with a holiday service or a community meal, or just the openness to being accepted for who he is in the context of a more extremist or fundamentalist setting. Yet also, certainly you showed the more unseemly side of that as well. Have you had experiences with extremist groups? Where did you do research? How did that come about?
I mean, I didn't overtly do research. I didn't set out to do research, but I did spend time in Jerusalem in the early 90s at Aish Torah. Now, they're not extremists, but they are a little bit farther along the spectrum than a a suburban kid from Toronto might have been comfortable with. But I was fascinated by it. Just I didn't know about Messianic Judaism. I didn't know about, a lot of these kind of strong ideas. I'd always seen the suburban Jews as the kind of weakling, and this was kind of a group that would kind of go forth, and live, in Hebron and places like that with a real kind of sense of strength. And it both appealed to me and repelled me at the same time, so I wanted to know more about it. And I spent about a month at the yeshiva, and it was really fascinating. And they did recognize me as somebody who could engage with this. The Rosh Yeshiva took me into his office and passed me a plane ticket and said, "I want you to change your flight." He said, "You give me a year of your life and you won't regret it." And I said, "Well, I'm a writer. I need to be around people speaking my language." He said, "Well, we have a writer here who studied with Malamud." And me, as a young, arrogant 22-year-old, I'm like, who cares? But I met with the guy. He lived in Harnof, and he published a novel about 20 years ago, and I read it. It was good. And he said, "I'll buy you any book you want by Malamud." And again, I was like, I've read everything by Malamud since, and I think it's amazing. But I just wasn't really that open-minded at the time. I think I just wanted to go home. I think I was lonely, and whatever this group was, they were not giving me what I needed. But I was vulnerable. I mean, I think on a different day of the week, I could have been taken in. And my father used to joke. He'd say, I knew a really sharp guy who drove a Saab and everything, and he went to Israel and married a widow with 12 kids, and he was really afraid that was going to happen to me. And it wasn't, but there were slight changes. And I imagine if I stayed another 3 months or another 6 months, things do kind of seep into you. It is, I want to say insidious, but that sounds negative because there are a lot of positives about that. But Aish HaTorah was an interesting, intellectually stimulating place for me.
And I think that's one of the things that you capture really magnificently in this book is both the draw, both being drawn to that and at the same time being repelled from it. And you hold that together throughout the novel. And it's interesting, the novel takes place before September 11th, 2001. And as you mentioned, it opens with Matthew on a rooftop overlooking the Twin Towers. I'm wondering, how did 9/11, the events of 9/11, play into the writing of the novel, into the story itself?
It didn't play into it much at all. I did think the world was going to end. I rember riding the subways and thinking someone's going to throw anthrax in the subway, so I better cover my mouth. It's the same naive thing that I did after all the suicide bombings, riding at the back of the bus, thinking, okay, well, if someone blows up the bus, I have a better chance. It didn't really change that much. I struggled so much in the early years of this novel just to kind of get the character down, the narrative voice. I basically knew I had this character, and I knew that his father was this larger-than-life character, this judge, and I knew it was going to have an explosive ending, but I didn't know how to get there. I had these vague ideas, and I just kind of stumbled around in the dark for so long. So 9/11 never really came into it, though, as the years passed. It's been a long time since 9/11 now. It definitely illustrates again that extremism is something that can come to us. Right. I was in Boston during the marathon bombings. I was a mile away from the Twin Towers on 9/11. My bus was blown up, bus 18 in Jerusalem. So, we're in a society where it can come and get you. And I wanted to kind of deal with that sort of, understanding what is it? Why would someone do such a thing? So yeah.
Wow. And you mentioned Matthew's father is a judge who actually ends up as a disgraced judge and spends most of his career trying to distance himself from his father, Matthew's grandfather, who was a Jewish gangster. And there is a real strong sense that the characters are bound or have to grapple with their lineage, where they come from. Are you making a point about the sins of the fathers to a certain extent, and how tied in we are, how trapped in we are by where we come from?
I was definitely playing with the idea that certain traits may be passed on through blood, not just through nurture, but through nature. And I like the idea that Julius Stone is this violent, murderous gangster whose son happens to be a judge. As we go through the novel, we realize they're not as different as they seem. Right. And I like the idea of that, have this very kind of cipher-like weakling of Matthew Stone, and have him kind of try and step into their shoes. And of course, he doesn't have the same gravitas or weight that they have, so he's not able to really kind of pull it off to the degree he wants. I was fascinated with that idea. I always felt, growing up in Canada, ahistorical, that I had no history behind me, and that's not true. I didn't find that, I didn't accept my history as a Jew until I went to Israel. I realized, I'd go there and meet people from England who looked like me and acted like me and had the same kind of neuroses. So it ties back to that image I have at the Akedah when Abraham is going to sacrifice Isaac, and I talk about how how would you feel if your father was prepared to kill you?
Right.
And I think that has echoed through the millennia since, this kind of neuroses, this kind of lack of safety in general. I mean, obviously there's the anti-Semitic aspect and how Jews have always traveled from one country to the other. That fits probably more into the neuroses that we have. But I think metaphorically, I like tying it into that moment with the patriarchs.
Yeah, and it's interesting because at one point, right, it's that the tradition and where you come from has that potential to be a real source of stability and comfort. I guess someone growing up in Toronto, realizing that you're connected to this long tradition of Jews might be comforting, but yet at the same point, there's that other side of it where, well, we actually have the paradigm of Abraham who is going to bring his son to sacrifice. Yeah,
it's amazing. Abraham is a fanatic, actually. He's an original fanatic. He circumcised himself at 99 years old. He was prepared to kill his son. And it's just kind of a fascinating kind of aspect, the two sides of the same coin.
Right.
Because he's also, the patriarch, the originator of two different religions. So I think it's fascinating in that sense. Yeah. I try not to give easy answers to anything. Everything has like different ways of looking at it. I strive to be complex while accessible. I think my prose is accessible, and I want the ideas to be the kind that will stay with you afterwards.
Yeah, as the novel unfolds, a reader might find themselves sympathizing with Matthew to a certain extent, maybe even rooting him on, perhaps, and in turn maybe realizing that they're rooting for a terrible plot to unfold. So I'm wondering, that's a powerful thing to put out in a novel. Is there a political message that's embedded in there? Are you saying something about the peace process or about anti-Semitism?
I think initially I was trying to root this character in the tradition of the books that I like to read most of all. I'm not going to answer your question directly yet. Okay. But then I can come back and answer it if you can kind of rephrase it a little bit. I was thinking of Meursault in The Stranger by Camus. I was thinking of Bigger Thomas in Native Son, which was written several blocks away from where I started writing the Book of Stone. Very kind of deeply unlikable characters, but yet since you're in their point of view, you're able to really kind of walk in their shoes and empathize with them. So yes, Matthew Stone is an unlikable character, but since we're seeing everything through his lens, we understand the baggage that he brings to the table. So yes, at a certain point, there is a certain sense of justice that if this act is carried out, it'll even the score for all the horrific things that have happened to the Jan Klinghofers of the world, the Ari Halberstams of the world, the people blown up in Bus 18, the list goes on and on and on for thousands of years. So I do want people to recognize that there's a sense of justice. Intellectually, it makes sense. But at a certain point when you realize what the plan really is, it's like the carpet is pulled out from under you, and I want the reader to kind of feel a sense of horror that they've consented to something that is morally objectionable somewhat. So I think that's kind of an interesting trick there.
So to pull the reader in, to actually make take some of that language to get people to sympathize or to understand the sense of justice that might pull someone like Matthew into that group, while at the same point almost following the reader out to a conclusion where then they have to catch themselves.
Yeah, I always aspire to Kafka's kind of credo that literature should serve as the axe that shatters the frozen sea within. If you're not shattered by this book, then you haven't been paying attention. And I think that's what the intention of this book is, to be a shattering experience, but to be an experience that you'll be thinking about for weeks and months afterwards. This is something that is not a beach book that you eat and you throw away. You read this book and it should stay with you. That's the intention.
Well, it certainly stayed with me, and I'm sure that other people will have a similar experience. The book, again, is The Book of Stone. The author is Jonathan Papernick. It is out now from Fig Tree Books. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.